Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This is S4A Livestream number 96 being recorded on Wednesday, April 26, 2023, here at twitch.tv/socialism S4A. And I'm joined in the chat by 37 viewers, and we're going to do some articles, we're going to do some chat, we're going to have a grand old stream today. So, before we get started with anything else, let's thank the patrons, patreon.com/socialisms4a. I'm a couple names behind here, so thanks also to anyone who signed up in about the last week or so. I have actually one of them, Tristan at $10 and Christiander at $5. There may be a couple of other names I'm missing there, but we'll get you into the credits as soon as I can. I would make content even if nobody supported, but I wouldn't be able to spend nearly as much time on it. So I really appreciate the patrons. Again, patreon.com/socialism for all. It's nice when you can actually clearly state the name of the channel. That's always a plus. But we don't run ads. We don't do sponsorships. I don't try to sell you a VPN service. We try to keep this non-commercial and viewer-supported. So major thanks. If you like this channel, thank me. Thank the people who send in articles. And also thank the patrons for enabling me to devote so much time to it, taking time away from pursuing wage work and other stuff that I need to do because I'm not independently wealthy. So thanks to the patrons there. And if you're new to the channel, well, we started out as a Facebook page posting socialist memes back in late 2019, early 2020, and got onto YouTube to read some theory and vent some political thoughts. And here we are 3 years later. So I am a U.S. American studying Marxism, specifically anti-revisionist Marxism-Leninism. Revisionism is a concept in Marxism where, and it's been a constant problem throughout the history of Marxism, people trying to come in and revise major theories of Marxism, like, oh yeah, socialism is great, but you don't need to have a proletarian revolution. That would be revisionism. And there are many different faces of revisionism. There have been different sort of forks in the road over the history of socialism, and revisionism needs to be combated at every turn. Hence, there are various traditions of anti-revisionist Marxism-Leninism, but I do like throwing that in there just to remind people that, we do need to be on the lookout for the revisionism because it's rampant. And actually, when I started doing this channel, I wasn't even, I was kind of taken aback by the depths of the revisionism that is out there. All kinds of reactionaries trying to call themselves Marxist, and the movement has fallen into, I think, sort of a state of disuse and disrepair and needs to be, in many ways, sort of rebooted. And there are various, more on the underground side, communist groups trying to combat that. So anyway, count myself among those people, but this isn't a party. It's a YouTube channel. I post human-read audiobooks of socialist works. I organize them into playlists. I sometimes add comments and explainers into the text, partly for myself and partly for newer listeners. We also do currently these weekly streams on Twitch, usually Wednesday at 1 Pacific, 4 Eastern, and that is 8 in the Universal Coordinated Time as well. Somebody keeps trying to tell me that it's 9 in UTC, GMT, and it isn't. It hasn't been since we switched to daylight savings, so please stop dropping in with that because I feel like I'm getting that comment every time, and I've used multiple time zone converters, and that's just not correct. We announced the live streams at the YouTube community tab, that page within the YouTube channel, also on Mastodon, Twitter, Patreon, so you can always check those to see if there's a stream coming up. And as I mentioned, this isn't a party, but if you are looking for a Marxist study group or organization, my current recommendation, you might check out Politsturm, Politsturm. They're an international group organizing study groups, and they're based in Ukraine, Russia, Armenia, and other countries. And again, a pretty strong network, it seems like to me, of anti-revisionist communists trying to lay the groundwork for the formation of a party to get the struggle going again. So otherwise, beyond that, I encourage you to get involved in your local left network, become familiar with the existing parties, unions, and other groups engaging in class struggle in your area to the exclusion of the Democratic Party. They're completely dominated by the 1% and not a suitable forum for ideological struggle. They're going to just co-opt anything you do. So Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, forget it. But most of the other parties that don't take the corporate money and things like that, they're small. Many of them are not Marxist. Some of those that are Marxist are revisionist or opportunist. But you might get to know what's going on in your area. That way, the next time that something pops off, an Occupy, a Black Lives Matter, whatever, or something maybe even bigger and better, you'll be in a position where people know who you are, you know who they are. Maybe you got half a dozen names in your phone that you can call up, like, what's going on? Do you want to organize something? So you do need to get out there and find out what's going on, or start your own thing if you're ready to do that. So, all right, it's a little bit of an intro to what we're doing here. And so what else is new on the channel this week? Well, I kind of hit it really hard the previous 2 weeks. So last week, I definitely went lighter. And we just did one stream, and I just did one audiobook because I'd done a lot the 2 weeks prior. And to be honest, sometimes I just get to a point where just saying the word socialism, it just gets to be too much. So, people do need to keep up a regular study, and that's really important. Sometimes if I hit it too hard, I have to take a week off. But that was kind of one of those weeks. As far as what is new, so we had a discussion of religion in last week's stream. And, we're in an interesting position doing this channel, which is that this is not in a party, which is a controlled environment where there are controls on who's a member, who's allowed to be a member, can you get kicked out of the party for repeatedly being a dipshit, whatever. There are not those controls when you're just doing broad-based, public-facing agitation and education like we're doing here on the YouTube and the SoundCloud and the Spotify, where these things get posted. So we get all kinds of randos dropping in and offering their unstructured, oftentimes very uninformed, ignorant comments about what we're doing. It gets to be kind of frustrating. But, what I set out to do when I started this channel, transitioning out of like the meme page, which that came after years of being involved with various real world organizing, like that was my background. And I decided it was time to, after, various romps through what passes as the U.S. left, whether it's, sock Dems, anarchists, libertarians trying to insert themselves into the left as well, which they most certainly are not. I decided, it was time to come back around to Marxism, which I'd been exposed to a long time prior, but never really deeply studied. Well, I decided it's time to do that because the U.S. left, especially post-2008, we're facing major crises of capitalism again, let alone, the whole U.S. global push for war under the War on Terror heading and all the other things. There's a real intensification of both neoliberal austerity in the police state domestically and imperialistic war and aggression abroad. And it's time to step it up, and it's time to learn the lessons that the left in various other countries learned a long time ago. Socialism is like 200 years old. Marxism is about 175 years old. And we don't have to just reinvent the wheel. We can learn from history because the fundamental class interests existing within capitalism are the same as they were 100 years ago. So you can go back and read about how the anarchists versus the sock Dems versus the communists, had their struggles, and those exact same things more or less are playing out today. So if you just go back and study a Lenin or something like that, it's shocking how much of it is directly applicable today. And you can kind of save yourself some, learning the hard way when you do get out there and network with your local left and assess sort of the current state of the class struggle in your area. But it is difficult because, now 3 years into this, I've done a lot of the reading. I've done more reading than many people in the general audience have. So, whereas that wasn't the case in the beginning, I'd done less reading than people in the general audience. So, I definitely feel like I'm pointing in a different direction at this point, more towards, I see a clear need for organization because, the kind of liberal individualism of everybody just coming up with their own take and then fighting everybody else about it, that's not going to work. This sort of online contradictory morass of liberalism, just people just firing off individual takes that are not adhering to any kind of a party line. There are downsides to a party line, but I feel like at this point, the advantages of having that kind of ideological organization and having people on the same page and being able to kind of enforce that, it really outweighs the disadvantages of having everybody go every which way and having no unity at all. There's a state of real disunity, and I think it's causing a lot of problems, and that's something I've been thinking about more and more. So it does get difficult to run a public-facing, non-org attached, general education channel where every commenter kind of thinks that their opinion is as valid as anybody else's. It isn't. There's people who've done additional analysis. There's people who've done additional study. And we really do need to start coordinating it. Like, it was a really good step 4 or 5 years ago to see a Marxist left, although it is still small, re-emerging in the US. But the next step of that is, after there's a sort of critical mass of people inhabiting this space now, the Marxist left space that's been recreated, it's got to get organized because people can't just hang out with their own individual opinion. We need to start constructing lines that can actually be advanced out in the world and connect with the masses and so on. Anyway, so the community tab, various things that happened in the last week. I just had a couple of posts. There was the Marianne Williamson thing. Let me see if I can put this up on the screen. So Marianne Williamson is a New Age author and motivational speaker who is running for, she's trying to primary Joe Biden. And let me see where I stuck this thing. Here we go. She got this big thing about the power of love, and that's like, that sounds nice and all. And to a certain extent, on a personal level, that's true and whatever. So she had this post, this is back from 2019. Love is the answer, and that is as relevant to public policy as to personal behavior. # big truth. And then at Baseball Fidel said, love didn't win the Battle of Stalingrad, but I get the sentiment. And she doubles down. Actually, yes, it did. So somebody posted this Keebler commercial at Austin Bunch of Numbers. Soldiers using love cannons while fighting in the Battle of Stalingrad, colorized 1942. Yeah, it's, love, freedom, justice, whatever. You have to ask the question that Lenin asked, for which class? We're in class society. Society is split along class lines. Power is split along class lines. You have to ask, when libertarians come out and say, freedom for which class? If you don't have a class analysis in there, it's going to be meaningless. And so, anyway, this sort of, love is the answer. I mean, do revolutionaries experience feelings of love for their class and for, is that a motivating factor in the fight? Yeah, but that's extraordinarily vague, and that's not really the end of the discussion. It's really just the beginning of it. And, that kind of slogan in itself doesn't really get you that far. It might get you, it might get some people started, but it's not going to take you the distance. You need to, you can't just vibe your way to revolution, okay? Love is great, and a certain amount of self-esteem, self-respect, and esteem for your class and comrades, solidarity, that's important in motivating yourself to do the difficult things that are required in advancing a revolutionary struggle. But you can't just vibe your way to revolution. You have to arm yourself with the tools of analyzing class struggle, that is Marxism, because that's what's going to actually enable you to follow through and not just try to like vibe your way. You can get a certain, you know, portion of the way there on vibes, but it's not gonna take you the whole distance. So anyway, that's my favorite Marianne Williamson moment. I mean, if you can't tell, it's kind of comical, I think, the campaign that she's running. You know, and just on the subject of Marianne Williamson, while this is coming up, I understand that the SocDem gang, people like Kyle Kalinske at Secular Talk, and so on, are kind of touting Williamson as like the next Bernie. I don't know why you'd want to be that. So she's going to be the next person to sell everybody out as a SocDem. Honestly, don't be the next Bernie. You know, don't sell everybody out. Don't rally people by the stadium full and then just lead them into the Democratic Party. Yeah, don't be the next Bernie who's just going to like lift up everybody's hopes and then drop them. Don't get me wrong, the Bernie moment was great. I mean, we saw the left rallying for political power in a way that we hadn't seen in a very long time. But it wasn't real in that he wasn't for real. He was intending to lead people into the Democrats, at least that's what he did. And where are we now? You know, did we totally transform the Democratic Party, like Bernie said? No, that can't be done. Bernie proved you cannot change the Democratic Party. Bernie had as good of a chance at doing that as you could possibly have. That was like maybe a once or twice in a century opportunity. Bernie coming in as an independent with actual government experience at the federal level. I mean, he was uniquely positioned, if anybody was, to do that. And didn't stand up to the Democrats, didn't lead an exodus out of the Democratic Party into the Greens or into a new left, you know, Labor Party or something. That was the time to do that. He didn't do it. And now look at it. You know, AOC, similarly, was going to bring the ruckus. What happened with that? Just got controlled by the Democrats. We need to keep the control in our hands, and the Democrats are owned by the 1%, just like the Republicans are. So, unfortunately, you know, that is the situation, and Marianne Williamson running her campaign ad starts with, you know, the middle class has been destroyed. You know, it's all this sort of social democratic, SocDem, rebuild the middle class, and then it ends with the Democratic Party must go back to its roots in Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR's New Deal. So that's not actually the roots of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party was formed and first took power in 1828. So that's like a full century prior, before the crash of 29 and the Great Depression that brought about, you know, some of the New Deal stuff. Brought about the terrible conditions in the 1930s, early 30s, that led to even more people rallying. And prior to that, in the 1920s, even before the crash, there was the Coal Wars. These were shooting wars, the biggest armed conflict in the U.S. since the Civil War, that was over militant mine workers organizing against big mining companies in the Appalachian Mountains. And before that, there was World War I and resistance to that imperialist conflict, and so on back. But it got really escalated in the 30s. And then you briefly had this faction of the ruling class. And FDR was a Roosevelt. I mean, he was a member of the fully elite, you know, 1%. And this faction of the ruling class took a different approach. They listened to some of the progressive reformers, and they said, okay, let's do some concessions. Let's reform this system, capitalism, and punish some of the most out of control capitalists to strengthen the overall dictatorship of capital as a system. And then it was a blip on the radar. You know, 15 years later, between 35 and 1950, 15 years later, we had Taft-Hartley decimating labor rights, laying the groundwork for the basic dissolution of the CIO, got absorbed into the AFL, the most reactionary trade union federation, and McCarthyism, and, you know, the blacklist of communists, suspected communists, and the FBI knocking down people's doors, you know, suspected communists, anybody who's remotely dissatisfied with U.S. society, life, foreign policy, whatever, domestic policy. So it was a blip on the radar. As far as the roots of the Democratic Party, FDR was the aberration, not the roots. So Social Democrats, if you're listening to this, I say to you, you're no more likely to get these reforms you want that you're limiting yourself to, which is when we say reformism versus revolution. Revolutionaries will pursue reforms. Lenin wrote, and Marx wrote about this too extensively. You get the reforms you can get, but you use them as agitation on the road to revolution. You SOCDEMs who are mere reformists, you want to limit the struggle to reforms. In other words, keeping capitalism, the dictatorship of capital, intact. You want to keep the private ownership of industry on a for-profit basis intact. That's mere reformism. That's going to lead you in circles. But the point is, you're no more likely to get that, with your like reasonable, mature demands or whatever. You're no more likely to get that than we are to get a revolution. Look at how they treated Bernie twice, if you want some evidence of that. The only time that they would do any reforms is just to strengthen their system against us. And right now, they're so arrogant that they don't even think that they need to do that. They don't even need to make minor concessions. Look at Joe Biden. $15 minimum wage. He had public option on his website when he was running. Forgiving the student debt. I mean, it's like he's done fucking nothing. Like less than nothing. Things have gotten worse. Yet in this country, people don't really protest in a major way unless a Republican's in office. So you got a two-stage problem. You've got the inactivity of people and protest generally. Like Americans just will get kicked in the face 20 times in a row and not stand up for themselves. That's a problem. Then you get a Republican in office. People are more likely to get out and get outraged and protest then, get out in the streets. But then your stage two problem is then the Democratic Party co-opts that outrage and protest, lather, rinse, repeat, and the cycle goes around and around and around. So as the left, attached to neither the Democrats nor the Republicans nor the Libertarians, these are all neoliberal parties that just are for as much unrestrained capitalism as humanly possible. We're in a situation where, we need to be opposing all of that and organizing independently of it. You need to organize independently of that 1% money and not be class collaborating. And we have a large enough, educated enough, skilled enough proletariat working, propertyless, people who have to work or beg or, not otherwise own property to get by in life. We can organize on our own. We can do it. It's got to be done, and we can't let it, when we do stand up, can't let it get fed back into the Democratic Party. These are things that we still haven't really learned. So step one is the fundamental task of the U.S. left is to detach from the Democratic Party and, in fact, organize against it. And, of course, against the Republicans. The point is against all 1% money. And then when we do, start attacking, like, the most outwardly reactionary party, the Republicans and Libertarians, although the Libertarians don't have nearly as much power, so it's mostly the Republicans, then not letting the Democrats step up behind us and be like, yeah, me too, I'm on your side. Like, bro, you're just in power. You're part of this problem. You're a hair to the left of the Republican Party. And that does not make you left. It makes you a hair to the left of fucking open fascists. So you have a fascist-collaborating party that's funded by the same people trying to tell you it's anti-fascist. That's the Democratic Party. It's not. It's not. And it's extreme opportunism to try to form a popular front with a fascist-collaborating party. The whole idea of the popular front is holding your nose to collaborate with across class lines, but with anti-fascist forces. Well, the Democrats don't even meet that minimum definition, let alone the fact that we have a big enough proletariat. We don't need to collaborate across class lines. This isn't a situation like, some like early developing capitalist country where there's not a large proletariat. So you have to collaborate with the petty bourgeois peasantry and maybe some urban petty bourgeoisie that's willing, and maybe even sections of the bourgeoisie that are anti-fascist. That just isn't here really in the U.S. today in 2023. What we do have is a gigantic proletariat that's 90% of the population. Well, we have the numbers, we have the skills. What we need is the guts. We need to, find it within ourselves to muster up what it takes to do this fight. Jesus ain't coming. This is up to us. And responsible adults handle their problems. So it means, like I said, this channel is about trying to get people educated enough that you understand the need for party work. But it's not to just keep watching this channel till the end of time, like that's the end. This is the beginning of the funnel that gets you onto the more organized, advanced work that is going to have to come in and then eventually take over this work. So anyway, people with illusions about Marianne Williamson at this point, don't get me wrong, Joe Biden is a terrible candidate, but I think we're kind of going in circles there, and the left really needs to get the fuck out of the Democratic Party and build up something. Elections are just a small part of that. You need party organization. That's the main thing. It's not about like winning elections per se. You can win some local elections. That's advertising. You might even be able to do something. But the main point is getting people organized. And you just can't do that within the Democratic Party. It's not a viable forum for ideological struggle or working class organization for militant class struggle, which is what is needed here. All right. The other thing that happened on the channel, and this is a bit more like specific to the channel. This is another here audiobook channel called Dessalines. And they've been going since 2017, longer than I've been going. Please don't take my fucking thumbnails. Like, they're recognizable. They're nothing. They're words and a picture, but they're done in a particular format that they're specific. Like I made it. I have over 300 audiobooks that have that style of thumbnail. It's come to be associated with my channel. This is just common sense. It's common courtesy. So anyway, they did an audiobook of Karl Marx, a brief biographical sketch with an exposition of Marxism by Lenin. And they just literally ripped my thumbnail and used it as their own. That's just super fucking rude. If you're another audiobook channel, you know that running a channel is difficult, can be a lot of work. It's not that rewarding. I mean, they don't put a lot of work into their channel, which is why it's been up since 2017, and they have 2,500 subscribers. I put a lot of work into S4A, which is why since 2020, we've grown to over 14,000 subscribers. Trying to do that engagement, trying to produce high-quality audiobooks. And yeah, it's just kind of rude to like step on somebody's effort like that. I did ask them to take it down and just like literally go find another picture of Lenin, but like don't use another YouTube channel's like thumbnail. That's just super fucking rude. And anyway, they tried to tell me they'd never heard of S4A and they didn't recognize it as my thumbnail. I was like, you run a Marxist YouTube channel? Like you're not aware of other people who are doing the same thing? Like, I'm aware of Adrestia's Revolt. I'm aware of Finball's Marxist-Leninist Theory channel. I'm aware of Dessalines. In fact, I linked to these people on the channels tab. And I had assumed a certain baseline courtesy and respect and solidarity among channels that are trying to do a similar thing. Like, we're all out here trying to get Marxist audiobooks to the masses of people. Can we build each other up and respect each other and not display blatant disregard? In fact, when I asked them to take it down, this was the reply that I got. Let's see, where did this go? So I was like, okay, the okay, well, please change it was in response to, I said, you didn't know that was my thumbnail? Like, how do you not know that? Like, I was subscribed to that channel because I try to stay somewhat, aware of what else is going on in this space. And they're like, no, I didn't know that was yours. I was like, okay, well, if you could change it. Last I checked, they had not changed it. And then they were replying to somebody else who was mocking me for being like, oh, my thumbnails. And I'm like, yeah, I put like a ton of work into having a well-curated, visually consistent channel that I think serves the audience that we're all, I think, trying to educate, correct? Like, I'm trying to make it easy for people at a glance to see, oh, I recognize that style. I know that that's S4A, and I know the certain quality level that I'm going to get there. So anyway, they replied to another commenter with the thing that you see in quotes there. I'm really glad I don't use YouTube much. Even the Marxists on here get crazy about the intellectual property of putting words next to pictures. They had previously put like a cracking up with laughter emoji. You know, and I just explained to them, I said, I have hundreds of audiobooks I recorded, published with that style of image, which is nothing special in itself, but I made it for my channel. The uniformity helps viewers to recognize my content at a glance. It's clownish of you to come in and just slap it on your stuff like that, because many people who listen to audiobooks on here, like people who are regular Marxist audiobook listeners, know that that's the format I've been using for over 2 years now. I started using that in early 2021. I had assumed a certain solidarity among Marxist audiobooks channels, and I'm not sure why you're surprised that I don't want you using the thumbnails that I made for my content on your stuff. Like, just make a fucking template for your thumbnails. It's not that hard. You know, I didn't think, people are like, oh, you got to put a watermark on your thumbnails. Like, no, can it just not come to that? I'd really rather not, you know, read by S4A, like, across the thing. It's just super fucking weird. Anyway. So, I didn't realize this person was that much of a dickhead. So, anyway, I stopped linking to them. But, seriously, let's have some solidarity and try to build up each other rather than acting like an antisocial prick. So that's that. That's what's new on the channel. We also did do an audiobook of Marx's introduction to a contribution of et cetera, et cetera. The thing that the opium of the masses quote comes from. I didn't really add extensive commentary about Marx on religion there, but to summarize, Marx says in that piece that the criticism of religion is the prerequisite to really criticizing society and to getting to any kind of radical liberation of the oppressed within society. You have to start with the criticism of religion. And basically, he concludes it by saying that the criticism of religion, in the way that it needs to be done for the proletariat to really see the need to liberate itself and to reach all the way down into the well of human dignity that is required to overcome all of the exploitation and oppression that keeps us down. To really summon up the courage for that, you need to come up with the sense and the philosophy that man, not God, is the supreme being for man. You know, we're all we've got, in other words. And he talks about Martin Luther and Protestantism and the Reformation, which was a rebellion against church power. And so for people who aren't that familiar about Catholicism versus Protestantism, Protestantism, like led by, Martin Luther or the Reformation, took power from the church, and it basically, because the Catholic Church's idea was that in order to have a relationship with the divine, you had to go through the priests and the church, and therefore it kept the priests and the church centered. You want God, you got to come through us. And what Luther said, and Protestantism said, is no, the individual can have a relationship with the divine, and we don't need the church. So what Marx says in that piece is basically what Luther did is took the chains of the church off of the body, but he only managed to do that at the cost of having the individual put their own chains around their heart. In other words, he took away the power of the priest in external society, but accomplished that by internalizing the priest into every individual's mind. So there's that kind of saying, kill the cop in your head. Marx here is saying, kill the priest in your head. That is sort of the hallmark of Protestantism. The Reformation took power away from the church, but then why are we still even believing in this concept? And Marx said quite clearly that for the proletariat to summon up what is required to have the thorough revolution that is needed to reorganize society from the point of view of the proletariat, that has to be done from the point of view of people who see themselves as it. You know, we're it. This is the best it gets. There's not an invisible friend or enemy or father or mother in the sky. This is it. What we do matters. And, you know, that is the basis of the kind of revolutionary outlook required to do all the things that are going to be needed to reshape society. You get caught up in this outdated ruling class ideology of religion, and you're never going to go the distance. So that was Marx, 1843, 1844. That was one of his first major works, even before the Manifesto. It's fundamental, and so people do need to hear that and listen to it. As I started out saying, you know, this channel is public facing, and so some of us are communists. Some of us are learning lefties or whatever the fuck. Like, you know, some people are like recent ex-Soc Dems. They're not communists yet. They're not communist, meaning somebody who really knows Marxism, has the tools of scientific socialism in their repertoire. They've adopted dialectical materialism. They know how to think dialectically, to shun idealism, to shun metaphysics. Those are communists. And it's, you know, atheism is an integral part of that worldview. You know, as Marx said, the criticism of religion is the beginning of this process. It's a prerequisite. So anyway, I oftentimes get into the chat before anything else. We're going to switch it up today and start with the articles and then do the chat in the back half. So I'm sure the people in the chat right now are just itching for me to get in there and start reading their comments. We're going to do that later because sometimes we get too far into the chat and then, I don't know, things just, I need to switch it up. There's things that are working about these streams and things that aren't working, and I'm trying to continuously tweak until we really get a good thing. So what we're going to do today, I have some articles on sort of political dynasty, and I think we're going to do those first. Then we have a viewer and supporter of the channel who I've exchanged messages with over the years of running this channel, sent in a write-up of their experiences in a company union, trying to organize in a union that is not very radical, and I want to read that. Let's start, though, with some articles about political dynasty and the handing down of wealth between feudalism and capitalism. So we got a few things here. Some are from Europe, and this was the article that kind of kicked it off for me. And sorry, my being a little bit slow here. Hopefully we won't lose the stream, but right now I'm having an issue loading the file, so we'll just the computer catch up here. There we go. All right. So here's an article from Quartz, and the title is "The Richest Families in Florence, Italy, in 1427 are still the richest families in Florence." So this is, you know, how little change you actually get between, you know, late feudalism and into capitalism. So it's a very brief article. This is by Amna Modin. This is from 2016, May 30. "The richest families in Florence, Italy have had it good for a while, 600 years to be precise. That's according to a recent study by two Italian economists." Whoa, why do that? Italian name, Guglielmo Baroni and Soro Mocetti. There we go. Or Mocetti. I don't know what the fuck. I don't really speak Italian. If you can't tell, who compared Florentine taxpayers way back in 1427 to those in 2011. Comparing the family wealth to those with the same surname today, they suggest these tax records do, that the richest families in Florence 600 years ago remain the same now. Quote, the top earners among the current taxpayers were found to have already been at the top of the socioeconomic ladder 6 centuries ago, Baroni and Mossetti note on VoxEU. The study was able to exploit a unique data set. Taxpayers' data in 1427 was digitized and made available online to show long-term trends of economic mobility. While researchers admit the flaws to tracing family wealth using surnames alone, they point out that Italian surnames are usually highly regional, and they do tend to pass on linearly. The families at the top of the socioeconomic ladder 6 centuries ago are the top earners among current taxpayers. Those at the top of the ladder had the most prestigious jobs, while families at the bottom had less esteemed occupations with earnings below the median. While it comes as little surprise that families pass on their wealth to their children, let's add under feudalism and capitalism, that's not the case in socialism, it's still somewhat remarkable that these families were able to maintain their wealth through various sieges of Florence, Napoleon's campaign in Italy, Benito Mussolini's dictatorship. I don't know why that would be surprising. Fascism was all about protecting the ruling class and the wealthy, and 2 world wars. The study adds further evidence on how the rich 2 world wars, but yet no revolution, and that's why. The study adds further evidence on how the rich remain rich. In England, researchers have previously demonstrated how a family's status in England can persist for more than 8 centuries, or more than 28 whole generations. It's a trait shared by elite families in China, whose high status has persisted since the Mao years. That I don't think is quite as one-to-one of a comparison. China's had capitalism for a very long time, and even when there was capitalism existing in China, for a period of that, up to about 1978, they were still really actively building socialism. And there was a struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, but it's not really the same as like the 800-year system in the UK. So anyway, but speaking of, let us switch to that article. So another one from Quartz. This is the proof that the 1% have been running the show for 800 years. And there you go. Yes, my family is still here. By Kabir Chibber. This is from 2014. And we read, a family status in society can persist for 8 centuries or more, according to a new study by 2 economists using the educational status and surnames in England between 1170 and 2012. That's 28 whole generations. Yeah, literally only a revolution in which a new class comes to power is when you break that up. That's really it. Surnames were first adopted by the upper classes in England, mainly the Norman, Breton, and Flemish conquerors of England, in 1066, usually from their estates in Normandy, and recorded in the Domesday Book of 1086, the nation's oldest surviving public record and effectively the first census conducted. Many of these surnames persist: Baskerville, Darcy, Montgomery, Neville, Percy, and Talbot. Many of these have persisted at the very top of society for generations. Attendance at Oxford or Cambridge, prestigious elite universities, has an even stronger correlation. Just consider some of the barriers to entry, such as the fact that Oxbridge, as the 2 universities are known in Britain, had its own special entrance exams until 1986, and until 1940, the exams for Oxford included a test in Latin. And this was despite the fact that attendance to all British universities was free until 1986. Quote, social status is more strongly inherited even than height, writes Gregory Clark of the University of California, Davis, and Neil Cummins of the London School of Economics. Quote, this correlation is unchanged over centuries. Social mobility in England in 2012 was little greater than in pre-industrial times. So in other words, capitalism has not brought us class mobility at all. It's brought much greater wealth for the ruling class. But until you get a socialist revolution in which the working class dispenses with the current ruling class and then sets up a new structure to rule society according to the class interests of the working class, this is what you get, and it will persist century after century after century. It's the historical task of the working class, the proletariat, the dispossessed wage workers who are exploited by the 1%, it's our task to overturn this system. And until we do, it's not going away on its own. And before 1902, there was little public support for university education in England. No kidding. Most scholarships went to students from the elite secondary schools to help them excel in the scholarship exams, not because they were poor and talented. The scientists expected that the expansion of state support in the 60 years to the 1980s for secondary and college education would stem the tide of the same names appearing. In other words, state support for people going to college, might break up this 1% circle jerk. However, quote, there is no evidence of this, they said. Quote, the earlier surname elite persisted just as tenaciously after 1950 as before. In fact, all the social and economic changes we take for granted haven't made a lick of difference to the correlation between elite and best educated surnames and social status. Quote, even more remarkable is the lack of a sign of any decline in status persistence across major institutional changes, such as the Industrial Revolution of the 18th century, the spread of universal schooling in the late 19th century, or the rise of the social democratic state in the 20th century. SocDems, take note, your system makes no fucking impact on the ruling class. This study is not the first to show how entrenched wealth has become. Quartz has written on how the bottom 90% of U.S. families are no wealthier than in 1986, and Thomas Piketty's examination of capitalism met with rapturous reviews. Although I will add, Piketty, for, trying to publish a work that's like Capital in the 21st century, it's, supposedly updating Das Kapital, Marx's Capital, his conclusion is basically just like tax the rich. I mean, the guy's no Marxist, definitely not revolutionary. But and how are you going to do that, by the way? How are you going to build the political power to do that? I don't know. But Cummins and Clark's work does show how far it goes. So that is how far entrenched wealth has become. It's been around for centuries and centuries. Revolution is the only thing that changes it. What else do we have here? Here's one from Guido Alfani, professor of economic history, Bocconi University. There we go. The top rich in Europe in the long run of history, 1300 to present day. This is from January 15, 2017. Recent research into the share of wealth owned by the richest households has given us important insights into trends in inequality. This column shows how we can now estimate the share of wealth owned by the richest households in Europe and how many they numbered from 1300 to the present day. Throughout this time, the only significant declines in inequality were the result of the Black Death and the World Wars. In the renewed interest in and of course they're looking at Western Europe that's still capitalist. Obviously there were massive changes in Eastern Europe and Russia and the other countries of the USSR and so on. In the renewed interest in long-term trends in economic inequality, particular attention has been paid to the share of income or wealth earned or owned by the top 1%, 5%, or 10%. The share of the richest is both interesting in its own terms. It shows us how rich, better off people actually were, and as an indicator of the overall trends in economic inequality. There is considerable evidence that the trend in the share that the richest earn or own determines the trend in general economic inequality, for example, as it is measured in Gini indexes. New time series of wealth concentration spanning the 20th and part of the 19th century recently have been produced for some countries by Piketty as well as Royne and Waldenstrom. This has considerably increased our knowledge of how wealth inequality has changed over time and in the share of the richest. This research has supplemented existing studies which had covered a few countries or areas only, particularly the UK, that was Williamson in 1985, and the US, Williamson and Linder, 1980. Now we have comparable data for the pre-industrial period. To a significant degree, this is due to the ERC-funded economic inequality across Italy and Europe, 1300 to 1800, which is available at the website there, dondena.unibocconi.it/capital all capitals, EINITE. So that's the name of the program. It's Economic Inequality Across Italy and Europe, EINITE. EINITE has collected, systematically and with a uniform methodology, information about long-term trends in wealth inequality and in the share of the richest for many ancient Italian states, as well as for a few other areas of Europe. This is drawing on research from Alfani, 2015 and 17, Alfani and Reichbosch, and Alfani and Amanati. Whenever possible, EINITE statistics cover the period from around 1300 to 1800. So they allow us to extend the series of the wealth owned by the richest. The series of the share of wealth owned by the richest. In other words, what percentage of overall wealth in the society was owned by the very richest people by about 500 years. Because previously we could do the 1900s, the 1800s, but couldn't do 1300s through the 1700s. And so they allow us to extend that back 500 years. Figure 1 shows the share of wealth of the top 1% between 1300 and 2010 using Piketty for the post-1800 period. So I'm not sure if that was the one that we just looked at or, yeah, no, here it is. Share of wealth of the richest 10% in Europe, 1300 to 2010. So you can see basically there between the two data sets, the new one that goes earlier is the blue. That's the Alfani series. And then the next one, the red one, is Piketty. And you can see there's a slight discrepancy. It ends, the old data set ends at like 76%, and then it picks up at 81%. But it's the same basic angle. So, if you average those out, I mean, and had the lines meet, they do form a continuous line, just sort of shifted up a few points. So that definitely looks like it's continuing a trend. So what do we actually see there? We see that wealth was growing, and then there's the Black Death, and so that plunges it for a while, like quite a while, about 200 years. Then it starts growing again, and it grows consistently up until just after 1900, and then starts to plummet. And basically between the pre-war World War I period, or really right about basically at World War I, down through a couple of decades after World War II, the share of the richest 10% in Europe plummeted. It went back down to the level that it was at in 1650 or 1600. And then it started growing again. All right. So there's some notes there. The Alfani series, the old series, is an average of the Sabaudian state, the Florentine state, and the Kingdom of Naples. So, and then the Piketty series is an average of France, the UK, and Sweden. So that could also account for the discrepancy in the two lines, like why they don't meet exactly. They're looking at different countries. However, the overall trend is clearly the same. Extending the Kuznets curve. Although the data used for the pre- and post-1800 periods relate to different areas of Europe, there is nevertheless an impressive apparent continuity in the series. Piketty estimated that in 1810, the richest 10% of Europeans owned 82% of the wealth. In a recent comparative article, I found that in a variety of Italian pre-unification states in 1800, the share owned by the top 10% was between 70% and 80%, so very close. The estimated average in Figure 1 is 77%. So that's the, I think, overall estimated average there. Remarkably, Piketty series for 1810 to 1910 shows the share of the richest growing at almost exactly the same pace as the one calculated for the series between 1550 and 1800. The empirical data therefore strongly supports the view that the left-hand portion of the Kuznets curve, an inverted U-path followed by economic inequality through the industrialization process. That would be that whole, Renaissance period. Like science starts being introduced, you start getting, manufacturing coming in with improved machinery, and that just increases throughout the 1600s, 1700s, and so on. It can be extended to the left by many centuries. We can make this claim even though the underlying causes of the increase in inequality are complex and will need further research to be identified correctly. In the 7 centuries recent research covers, across all the territories for which we have data, we find only 2 phases of significant inequality decline. Both were triggered by catastrophic events. The first is the Black Death, the most terrible epidemic in human history, affected Europe in 1347 to 51. Afterwards, the richest 10% lost their grip on between 15% and 20% of overall wealth. This was a long-lasting decline in inequality. It lasted like 200 years. The richest 10% recovered their pre-Black Death quota only in the second half of the 17th century. This decline in the share of the top rich, as well as in overall inequality, was probably the consequence of 2 main factors. On one side of the distribution, there was an increase in real wages of skilled and unskilled workers. We have evidence for this in many areas of Europe, as described in Pamuk. This helped a larger proportion of the population to gain access to property. On the other side, large patrimonies fragmented due to a mortality crisis, which was occurring in the presence of an unmitigated partible inheritance system. Also then, shocks occurred. The second dip was 1915 and 1945. This was related to the 2 world wars, as argued by Piketty. The share of wealth owned by the top rich has been growing again since around 1950 and reached 64% in 2010, but it's still far from the peak of 90% reached in 1910. The share of the richest 10% today is about the same as that in Europe, or at least Italy, immediately before the Black Death. Additional research would substantiate these empirical similarities. One thing is clear, though: the long-term perspective of recent research requires us to move beyond the characterization of inequality time dynamics provided by Kuznets. Milanovic recently argued that long-term trends in inequality could better be described as a succession of Kuznetsian waves, while Scheidel proposed that we generalize to an even longer period of human history the leveling ability of epidemic and war-induced mass mortality. Although that's not the case. Europe had a lot of wars, and you don't see major dips like that. I mean, you could maybe dig deeper into what was going on in that 200 years where the inequality was lower, but yeah, I'm not sure about that one. Anyway, because war was just not the same as it is in the modern era in earlier eras. Boy, I can't talk today. In earlier eras, there we go. We need more research and more encompassing databases, especially for the pre-industrial period, to assess confidently the characteristics, causes, and implications of the very long-run tendency for wealth to concentrate in the hands of the few. How many households were rich? New research data allow us to ask many more than how were the rich. How rich were the rich? I got thrown off by that sentence isn't really accurate. New research data allows us to ask many more questions than how rich were the rich. For example, we might wish to know how many were among the rich. This is an easy question to ask, but not to answer. We need to find a way to define the rich as distinct from the rest of society. The simplest way of doing this is to give a relative definition of the rich, setting the bar at a certain multiplier of the median income or wealth. For wealth, a convenient threshold is 10 times the median. If we apply this threshold to the data provided by the iNight Project for a variety of ancient Italian states, we get figure 2, which is here. Figure 2, prevalence of the rich in Italy, 1300 to 1800, with rich being defined as 10 times the median wealth. And so you see there the Sabaudian state and the Florentine state, Kingdom of Naples, and the cities of the Sabaudian state only. This figure shows clearly that during the early modern period, from around 1600, the prevalence of the rich grew almost continuously until the onset of the Industrial Revolution. The rich made up no more than 5% of the overall population during the Middle Ages and the first part of the early modern period. By 1800, in the Sabaudian state in northwest Italy, 10% of the population was rich, and in 1750 in the Florentine state in central Italy, 14% were rich. This suggests that society was becoming more polarized, and we would expect that because the growth of inequality under capitalism, which capitalism was just really getting started then, capitalism intensifies inequality. It's just what it does. It makes the capitalist class richer and fewer in numbers, and the rest of society gets proletarianized, or reduced to propertyless wage workers or beggars or whatever. So alongside the increase in the share of wealth concentrated among the richest, as seen in Figure 1, we see a larger group of people growing ever more distant in terms of wealth from the rest of the population. The relative stability of our indicators during the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries suggests that the Black Death had less effect on the prevalence of the rich than on their wealth. The stability in Figure 2 is, however, at least partly artificial. It's due to the interaction between the components of the aggregate distributions used there. So it's sort of a statistical artifact that is making it look that way. If we focus on specific case studies, we find that in every known case, a decline in the prevalence of the rich occurred after the epidemic. For example, in the Piedmontese city of Cherasco, the rich households made up 4.7% of the total in 1347, just before the Black Death. By 1395, just 3.1% of households were rich. It would be interesting to know how many rich households there were after 1800, but there seems to be a largely neglected field of inquiry to date. Knowing this would give us additional insight into how an increasing wealth concentration shaped society. This seems to be one of the cases in which we know more about ancient societies than about recent ones, including the one to which we belong. So I don't know about that. I would be interested what Marxist scholars focused on Italy would have to say about this, but I feel like somebody probably has done that study somewhere. According to this guy, he couldn't find it, so that is that. We'll leave it there for now. And I'll tell you what, I will catch up with the chat now, and then we'll come back to the story of being in a yellow in a company union after we've caught up with the chat. So let's see what's going on with the chat today. All right. What Mastodon instance am I on? Let's see. Let me read out. I haven't memorized it yet. Let me see. What Mastodon am I on? Where's the tab? Let me find the tab. Let's take a second. Where's my tab? It's near my Twitter. There it is. I wish Mastodon had chosen a different color. It's like the same blue as Discord, and I just don't recognize the Mastodon logo when I see it. So it is ioc.exchange /@socialism for all. So yeah, @socialism for all @ioc.exchange. That's where it's at. That's also linked off of the link tree. Actually, I'm not sure. If you go to the YouTube channel, there's a bunch of links. Some of them are exposed. Some of them you click on a link tree and you can see the rest of the links. So people who say religion and Marxism are compatible absolutely baffle me. Yet you're watering down Marxism. You're not making religion better. You're making Marxism worse. And that's not to say that you can't. So again, there's a difference between communists, people who've studied Marxism, organize in a party, etc., and people existing in a society in which socialism is being built on the way to communism. There's a difference. So religion may not be, eradicated overnight in a socialist society. That is a long-term thing, moving people away from mysticism and superstition towards science and a rationally oriented society. But it does not happen overnight. So the idea that you can build socialism with some type of religion existing in your society, yes. But being a communist and being religious, that's a different story. All right. Hopefully people understand the difference between a communist and a person existing in a society in which socialism is being built, but are not a studied, organized communist. Oh yeah, so people are mentioning Tucker Carlson got fired from Fox News. I mean, now he can play the fake victim card that fascists love so much, so he will, I'm sure, continue on in an independent capacity, or he'll join OAN, or he'll join Newsmax or some other fucking fascist rag. But, yeah, this is what happens when... there was a couple of things going on. Fox News just settled a giant lawsuit with Dominion election... voting machine company for almost $1 billion, $800 million. They didn't let it go to trial. But yeah, and the thing is, people were trying to defend Tucker Carlson saying Oh no, the leaked texts and things show that Tucker Carlson was actually opposed to Fox News's election fraud narrative that they were pushing. Yeah, well, even if that's true, that makes it actually worse that he went along with it publicly for the most part. So in other words, it's another instance of Tucker Carlson lying to his audience knowingly. Just like on the COVID vaccines, just like everything else, he knowingly lies to his audience about. He knows and thinks one thing, and then he gets on the air and he says something else. So that is actually a strike against Tucker Carlson, not for him. That he thought that the election fraud thing was bullshit, but he contributed to it knowingly anyway. That's a guy you should not trust. All right. The other thing is, and so that got settled. And then also there was a lawsuit pending against Carlson for allegedly creating, I mean, I say allegedly because it was not proven in court. I think it's entirely plausible that he had created an extremely hostile, sexist environment on the set. So it was like a very discriminatory and abusive workplace. That was what the lawsuit was saying. So, there's multiple things going on with Carlson. Yeah, we'll never really know, but none of this actually makes Tucker Carlson look better. Which, of course, all the deranged libertarian nitwits, Glenn Greenwald, Jimmy Dore, all came out afterwards, and it's like they fired him because he speaks the truth. No, that's not why. No, that's not why. Like, if you really think that's the reason, like, you need to fucking unplug, back off of the Kool-Aid. You are in extreme disinformation land. Had the misfortune of watching Brianna Joy Gray and Kshama Sawant debate supporting Marianne Williamson's presidency. The only pro argument over and over is just desperately hoping that Marianne Williamson does all the things that Bernie didn't. I mean, she's going to get railroaded. Like, you can't organize in that fucking party. And that's kind of my point, is like whether you win the election or not, you need working class people to be organized. Like, okay, the election comes up, everybody in the party devotes whatever percentage of that party's resources and efforts, because you should be engaged in multiple other forms of class struggle. Electoralism is like maybe 10% of it. The other 90% you should be actively engaged in rebuilding the labor movement, in tenants unions and other community organizing, in ballot efforts, whatever it is, maybe like running some local candidates. But it's like 10% of it is the electoralism. The rest of it is building a militant, disciplined party so that the election comes up, you win or you lose the election, whatever, but your party stays intact. Like, your party only gains class consciousness, militancy, and organization for that election having come up. If you're organizing in the Democratic Party, it's going to get wiped out every time because they own that party. The 1%, same people who fund the Republicans. And we've broken this down. Just go to opensecrets.org. They're funded by the same exact industries with like a couple of differences. The Democrats will also get, if you look at like the top 10 Democrats and, the top 30 industries donating to them, and then the top 10 Republicans and the top 30 industries donating to them, there's a couple of differences. Like, Republicans get building trades, transportation, and like one other thing that the Democrats don't get. And then the Democrats get public sector employees, teachers, and like one other thing that the Republicans don't get. Otherwise, like 25 of the top 30 are like identical and almost in the same position too, in terms of like where they rank in terms of the amount of money they're giving. Anyone who is really rich and wants to support the dictatorship of capital donates to both parties, and they ideologically control both parties too. So you just can't organize in that party and then have any lasting thing that any lasting organization where all the consciousness, all the lessons learned, all the networking, all the relationships that need to be existing, forming that grassroots web that is the basis of class struggle. It belongs to the Democrats. It belongs to the capitalists who fund that party. You've got to do it outside. So The Marianne Williamson thing, organizing in that party, it's destined to just strengthen the Democratic Party in the end. I'm not saying nobody should run against Joe Biden. Joe Biden's a terrible candidate, and he's going to be like really fucking old, and he's not in like good health either. But I mean, he's a terrible candidate. That's just the bottom line. And I'd love to see somebody like mount a serious left challenge there, if for nothing else than to get that Bernie moment of drawing people back out of the woodwork, getting people hopeful, getting people thinking about a more positive future that we can fight for. But again, organizing within the Democratic Party, all you're doing is strengthening the Democratic Party long term. It feels good in the moment that you're like, oh yeah, we're getting out there, forget about tomorrow. No, you can't, because look at Bernie. He got all these people together, tens of millions of people. And does that organization still exist? No, it got funneled into the Democratic Party. So anyway, hopefully that lesson is sinking in. If vibing into revolution was possible, France 1968 and so on, would have worked. I mean, there are a variety of problems there, but yeah. Democratic Party, the more sensible imperialists. Again, they're like a hair to the left of the Republican Party, which is barely saying anything. It's good cop, bad cop. They both work for the same class interests, and they're both there to bust you. They're using different styles. No doubt, the Republican Party is more openly reactionary and attracts a lot of the more conscious fascists into it. Democratic Party, though, works with them hand in glove on every major project of foreign imperialism and domestic austerity and oppression. And the Democrats also paved the way for the continuation of this relationship by doing everything that they can to stamp out the left. If they were serious about being anti-fascist, which don't make me laugh, they would partner with the left against the most openly reactionary, faction in the ruling class, the Republicans, to crush the Republicans, send them into the dustbin of history, and then form, some sort of popular front. That's never been the case. It wasn't the case around World War II. It's not the case now. It's not going to be. Let's learn from history. Dialectical mysticism with the vibes. Maybe if we water down the already watered down Bernie. Yeah, I mean, if you liked Bernie, and the Bernie was the Green Party watered down about 30%. So I'm like, if you liked Bernie, you should love the Green Party. And I'm not saying that the Green Party will necessarily go the distance. It's not a Marxist party, and the right wing of the Greens has all sorts of contrarian and libertarian leaning elements. But that would have been the sensible thing for Bernie to do, have done at least. Was, okay, we tried, the Democratic Party, everybody now go join the Green Party. If you had people of that stature, him and AOC and whatever, at that time leading a mass entry into the Greens, you could argue that would have been a slight watering down of the Greens, but that was actually the party that they belonged in. And instead, they're in a neoliberal party owned by the 1%, an imperialist party, and they're getting nowhere, and that's very, very predictable. No matter how many times Bernie Sanders chants, my good friend Joe, what does that get us? Nothing. Nothing but misfortune. Russell Brand talks about spiritual revolution in my country, but it's purely for the libs. Be nice and everything will be okay vibes. Russell Brand is a fascist. I mean, we did a video on Russell Brand supporting the fascist trucker convoy in Canada. And he's like a wild anti-vax nut job. He's fully reactionary, which is unfortunately a lot of how those New Age people turned out, because again, no class analysis. You can, some of that stuff, I meditate. I encourage other people to meditate. In fact, it is good for you. It can bring a lot of psychological insight, psychological peace, emotional regulation, emotional clarity and calm. It can be really good and actually tap you in. I feel like it's part of how I became more socially conscious. But you have to follow through with the class analysis and the social analysis. You can't just have personal liberation and end it there. Because we have class exploitation and oppression tied to that. and it has to be confronted. I do happen to actually believe that meditation can, I mean, if you're not doing it to the point of being so blissed out that you just sort of like don't care about anything and like, nothing matters, that kind of thing. But if you're doing it to a point where you're gaining clarity and insight, that can actually be hugely helpful. I know it is for me personally. But yeah, you can't just purely vibe your way there or do, the mantra that is going to like unlock the revolution or what, any of the, that sort of stuff. Hello, found you a week or so ago. Really enjoying it. Thank you. Well, welcome. Glad it's helpful. That's what I say to everybody that says that it's helpful. I'm glad it's helpful. It's why we're out here doing this. So absolutely, I'm glad to see you. I'm happy you're listening. Because plenty of people still aren't listening. But we do need to build up a left that knows what the fuck it's doing, and I'm trying to help that along with other channels to do the same. Hang on a second. Consumerism doesn't win elections. Neither does it lead to revolution. A good reminder. The deeper ML topics channels don't get much attention. Finished Bolshevik posts on YouTube for like 10 years. Yeah, I mean, I feel like Finball's videos are generally pretty good quality. They don't post very often. They post maybe like once or twice a month. Or at least that was like kind of the consistent thing. They do have a pretty big following, though. I mean, they have like over 40,000 subs. So, there's at least that. Hang on a second again. I feel like if Finball posted more often, like that would be... But, everybody posts at the frequency that they can. I'm not trying to like yell at Finball for not posting more. You make the videos you feel like making. But, yeah, I mean, I link there too because I think it's a quality channel. And Marxist Paul, also doing quality work, posts about twice a month, I think is getting back into streams a little bit. That's good. I feel like there were a lot of channels that were sort of big in the mid to late 20 teens that, like Bad Mouse and stuff, that like don't really post anymore. Also, like a fair amount of people went the way of BreadTube, where they're just doing like pop culture video essays. That stuff, I don't really understand how people watch that. It's like, wow, the big new Netflix show. Here's like an analysis of like clothing trends. And it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? I don't really get how... I did, so for a while, I was doing the Hanging with the Sockdem Gang series on the channel, critiquing people like Kyle Kalinske and Humanist Report and stuff like that. And, I'm happy to say some of those channels did better. I feel like I did one, started kind of criticizing Jordan Chariton of Status Quo, talking to Richard Wolff. I feel like Status Quo is kind of actually kind of tightened up a bit. And I like the direction that they've gone in a bit more. Of those more mainstream channels. That's nice to see. But yeah, I tried to do a Hanging with the BreadTube Gang, and with very few exceptions, literally the videos are just me going like, what the fuck is this video? And then just turning it off. So I did that one weekend, and then I like never did it again. So, yeah. Russell Brand did anti-gentrification community work in a London borough and fought Fox News somewhat in 2016, but since then has been a huge disappointment for me. I'm actually ashamed of myself for ever thinking Russell was decent, but you live and learn, I guess. Yeah, we've all got lessons to learn as we improve the left and make it into something that can actually fight for our interests and win and build a socialist society, but we do still have a long way to go. These are the kinds of lessons that we have to learn along the way. So, yeah. Yeah, the thumbnail thing. It's not about IP. It's about originality. It's like stealing somebody's name, It's just recognizable. I don't think those thumbnails are like... I didn't use the golden mean or anything to, like, perfectly calculate the thumbnails and only I can use it. It's just like... It's like a visual version of, like, somebody's name. Like, that's the style they use. It's part of their sort of presentation, the channel. Like, just... It's just weird, man. Like... I feel like anybody, that's like kind of common sense. So I don't really know. But the way that I found out about that was I was looking through my subscriptions and I saw the fucking thumbnail and I was like, what the like my blood ran cold for a minute. I was like, wait a minute. I didn't upload today. And then I looked at it further, and I was like, I read that a million years ago. That was like literally, I think, the first audiobook I put up on the channel. I was like, wait a minute, that isn't me. Why is my thumbnail there? It was the most like bizarre experience. Like I just saw it in my subscriptions feed. I'm like, what the fuck? There were like a couple of levels of that not making sense. And then I was like, did he just steal my thumbnail? Like who the fuck would do that? That's such a weird thing to do. Like that was not even on my radar as something somebody would consider doing. So I had no like response ready for us. Like, what are you doing? Like that was the weirdest thing. Oh yeah, so Dessalines usually just uses the book cover for thumbnails. Why not just keep doing that? I guess there wasn't one or something. Who knows? Like I don't really know. I don't feel like they're being straight with me in the first place. So I can't, that's what they said, but is it truthful? I really don't know. It's really weird. I don't think I would have gotten to communism if I had not gotten out of evangelical Christianity. Absolutely. It's a force of fascism in the US. And started seeing the world as reality instead of as a foo-foo place where we have to suffer before we get to heaven. Yeah, that's incompatible. It's incompatible. And as somebody said in the last stream, and I think that this says a lot, I'm seeing multiple people that I know in real time go Christian as they go fascist. I've seen that in my own life. It's true. Oh my god. Somebody posting cringe ASCII art of the US flag? What's going on in here? I feel the exact same way if I never got out from under the thumb of Catholicism, Christianity. I mean, Catholicism is a subset of Christianity, and ultimately religion as a whole. I don't think I'd be where I'm at currently either. I mean, honestly, scratch through the left movement today, you will find a lot of people who were raised in a very conservative environment and hated it and, decided this needs to go. The whole social system that originated this needs to go. And those are the people we should be talking to, not the people trying to fucking uphold that system. I became an atheist first before becoming a communist. Yeah, I mean, and that would go hand in hand, I think, as well, or at least there's a decent potential because that idea in sort of atheism, like we're all we've got, as Marx says in that audiobook, the point of the point of pointing out that religion is an illusory pleasure is not to just make you bear the chains of oppression without any comfort, even though it's illusory. The point of pointing out that it's illusory is we have to throw off the chain to get the real pleasure. And it's just super clear. It's an excellent piece. Go check it out. You can just search on Opium of the Masses. It's like one of the most recently posted videos, and it's 35 minutes. There's parts about it that are like super specific to German history, and then there are passages in it which are generalizable about where Marx is just talking about those concepts generally. If I'm not mistaken, these old European families initially got rich by doing things like semi-legally collecting road tolls. The nature of the feudal state, I guess roll toads would work too. The nature of the feudal state, it wouldn't, but it's fun, meant that the king or local lords didn't have much power over them, partly because they relied on getting a cut of what the families made. Yep. I mean, just accumulating wealth in general, it's scummy. Like, no matter what era you look at, it's not going to, you're going to be looking at stuff that is basically antisocial. I think that the transition from feudalism to capitalism was less violent in Italy and England. In England, the lords became capitalists because power in the English feudal system was less centralized, unlike France and Russia. I think Italy might be more similar to England, but I don't know. England did have a revolution, but yeah, they're trying to say just less violent between the bourgeoisie and feudal aristocracy. It was very violent for the proletarianized peasants. English Civil War. And somebody adds, the violence of that transition was definitely worse in the German and Dutch regions. The Protestant Reformation and things like the 30 Years' War were expressions of that transition. It's a very interesting time in history. Yeah, I think this is an interesting topic generally because, while the bourgeoisie, when we're talking about the transition from capitalism to socialism and the proletarian revolution that overturns capitalist rule and knocks the capitalists down from their peg as the rulers of society, the bourgeoisie are always going to use some amount of violence to try to hang on to power. If socialists had our way, we would snap our fingers. The whole thing would just happen right now and, be completely peaceful. The bourgeoisie, though, would literally rather kill most of us than let that happen. So, but it varies from country to country. When there is a transition in the ruling class, like which class is the ruling class, sometimes it's relative. Sometimes it's more violent. The bourgeoisie put up more of a fight, and sometimes it's less violent. Like the Russian Revolution, there was, a very significant war and civil war around that. Russia got invaded by all the capitalist forces of Europe, trying to take it back over for counter-revolution and capital. Cuba, by contrast, there was some fighting, but it was one of the most peaceful revolutions ever. So it is relative, and the people doing the violence are the people trying to hang on to power. The rest of us just want them to hand it over, and they want to selfishly keep it for themselves so that they can keep exploiting us and living at our expense. So there was a long gap between the English Civil War and the Industrial Revolution. The English Revolution, Civil War was very violent, yeah. I'm just trying to work out why we still have feudal representatives. Well, there's different reasons why the capitalist class will hang on to feudalism. One of the main reasons is it helps to anchor the dictatorship of capital against the emerging proletariat. So capital comes in and actually Marx talks about this in the contribution to the critique that we're just talking about. And so basically the capitalists come in, Lenin writes about this a lot too. Capitalists come in as the freedom fighters who are going to liberate the whole of society from feudal rule. Except then when they get in, they just rule for themselves, and they're a small minority of the ruling class whose interests are, of society, small portion of society whose interests are antagonistic to the majority of society. Because capitalists can't be capitalists without a proletariat to exploit by extracting surplus value from. So yeah, when capitalists get in and say, we're going to free you all from feudalism, it's only because they're going to enslave you to themselves. All right. The difference of when the proletariat takes power is the proletariat is the majority of society, and when we take power, our interest is not in exploiting anyone, but in proletarianizing everyone. The reduction of everyone in the population to the same relationship to the means of production. That is the relationship, that relationship is their class status. So creating a classless society in which everyone has the same relationship to the means of production. So the bourgeoisie and capitalism, the longer it goes on, proletarianizes most of the population, but they never proletarianize themselves fully. They will always try to stay in power apart from, separate from, and above, the proletariat whose labor they exploit. And so one of the ways that they can do that is they don't completely abolish all of the remnants of the feudal reaction. They keep some in their back pocket. And I feel like there's a certain parallel, although it's not exactly feudalism in the U.S., there's a sort of, it's fascism, but a sort of, neo-feudal type extreme reaction that, the Democrats can never do anything because the best you can hope for is just keeping the Republicans out of power. And, we should be so thankful that we have these enlightened liberal capitalists that are going to protect us from the ultra-reactionaries. And that's the state of society as it will be till the end of time, according to the U.S. ruling class. Like, that's the best you can hope for. Again, so that's why they keep around the ultra-reactionaries as sort of a bulwark against any proletarian freedom fighters getting any ideas. So another comment, I knew it wasn't a meritocracy, but damn, I like those specifics, especially about the Black Death. When workers die in large numbers, less wealth is created, so there are fewer rich people. The Industrial Revolution is a bottleneck for populations of wealthy people, since, again, fewer workers can do more work. Is that right? I think it's also just the emergence of capitalism as a property relation specifically, as distinct from feudal populations, the emergence of the money, power, and commodity exchange being the basis of society, which is, hallmarks of capitalism, major defining characteristics of capitalism, that enables the wealth to become more concentrated more quickly than anything else. So it's partly just in the legal property relations, as well as the improved technology. It just happens so much faster because labor is so much more productive because of the technology that is at our disposal. So anyway, what the hell is Kool-Aid? That's funny. It's from a German. Kool-Aid is a very poor quality, artificially flavored and colored, sugary fruit punch like substance. So anyway, the reason for the phrase drinking the Kool-Aid. So if you look up Jim Jones in Guyana, this was a cult that committed, trigger warning, suicide, committed mass suicide when they were going to be raided by everyone drinking poisoned Kool-Aid. So the phrase drinking the Kool-Aid means getting too much into cult-like uncritical propaganda. You're drinking the Kool-Aid of a particular cult means you're sacrificing your own health, sanity, and knowledge for some highly, highly biased cult-like uncritical propaganda. Since the Catholic Church provided structure and justification for the rule of the military noble class, this rule was challenged by a nascent capitalist class, which is why some of the first states to convert to Protestantism were small merchant states in the Holy Roman Empire and the Baltic region. You Americans are on some hardcore shit, lol. Anyone who thought the Canadian Convoy was grassroots is delusional. So that thing, go back and read the thing. Just search on Russell Brand and KK Convoy, like Convoy with not a C but 3 Ks instead. I did a couple of videos on that thing. That was organized by fascist activists involved in the Wexit movement, which is a secessionist movement for the Western provinces in Canada. It's organized by the far right. It's similar to the Pacific Northwest Territorial Imperative and the Secessionist Project among fascists in Northern California. So it's that region of Canada that borders, the Northwest Territorial Imperative states, Montana, Idaho, where you get all the extreme white supremacists and neo-Nazis in the U.S. Well, there's some of that in Canada too. And those were the people organizing the anti-vax convoy. And it wasn't just anti-vax. They wanted to roll back like all the COVID protections. So yeah, that was definitely not grassroots. I'd definitely like to hear more about channels which go deeper into Marxism like S4A, Finball, and Marxist Paul. I feel like so many creators right now have either leaned into media analysis or Socialism 101. I mean, we did more of that in the beginning because that was me also brushing up on Socialism 101. And then it took me a while to do, we're still doing the more advanced readings. But for me now, I'm definitely more poised. I can still throw out some Socialism 101 stuff. And, we still do the frequently asked questions kind of stuff that comes up sometimes. But, I'm still open to doing that as refresher. And I'm aware, I watched the numbers. We got 500 to 600 people coming in every 28 days as subscribers on the YouTube channel. And by the way, don't forget, SoundCloud and Spotify were on there as well. So go follow that. And like the stuff. I think there's, the Spotify is still kind of growing. SoundCloud, though, I've migrated over most of the audiobooks. So do check that out if you're low on data or whatever. Those things could use some interaction. It's nowhere near like on YouTube. I also set it up much, much later. Anyway, where was I going with this? Yeah, there's a lot of creators getting into just sort of BreadTube type cultural essay stuff, and that stuff is I know it pays better, but you got to decide when you're doing this stuff. Are you actually trying to educate people in service of a movement, or are you trying to pad your fucking bank account? Because you got to decide. It's really one or the other. Thanks to the patrons who are supporting. That's really important because, again, time. It definitely lets me spend more time on this. But to really, get the big bucks, you got to abandon the serious stuff and get into that more media analysis stuff. And it's just that doesn't belong in a movement. It needs to stay focused on why are we educating people about Marxism, so they can come up with more individual liberal takes about it, or so they can go join a party and start doing disciplined party work. Getting people interested in and seeing the need for that kind of party work. I think that channels like this, to the extent, for the duration of a channel like this being relevant, in other words, when an actual party emerges, it'll be doing this work itself, and me continuing to exist would be in opposition to that at a certain point. We don't have that party at this point. So, but yeah, it needs to be oriented towards doing the steps that the movement needs. Otherwise, you're just out trying to line your pockets, and that's utterly cynical. That is, I don't know. Anyway, I see it happening, and it's not a good thing. So anyway, socialism for beginners serves a purpose, so I'm not belittling that, but they don't do anything for people who already know the basics. Yeah, well, I'm getting there as fast as I can, and I appreciate that, and I support your sentiment. And I'm just saying, personally, I am getting there as fast as I can, so yeah. The Christian Early Communists is a good read, and you can see how Rome would have wanted to co-opt that energy. Yeah, remember, Christianity didn't become the state religion of, until 300 AD. So, I mean, it was around for a while, and, subversive. So, yeah, you would want to co-opt that for sure. We'll be doing some texts on, Engels wrote a lot about early Christianity, so we'll be doing some of those texts. Clearly, this is a topic that needs to be delved into, so. Let's see. A trans friend of mine is talking about how a former friend of his now found God and is negating the existence of trans folk on social media. Yeah, I knew somebody did the exact same thing. If someone, quote, finds God, it usually means they have found fascism or at least reaction. I mean, it can mean different things. That's usually a person that has gotten to a point of extreme alienation and feelings of disempowerment, and that coupling with some kind of a movement like that gives them a false sense of that power, and they feel better, and then they start attacking on behalf of the reactionary interests that put that stuff out there. Yeah. I grew up in a dope house. I later moved into a upper blue collar Christian household in middle school. By then, I'd already seen too much to believe in Christianity. In many ways, I was already radicalized against the society. I just had no solid direction. Yeah, and this is why we need to make Marxism as accessible as possible, because there are plenty of people out there who would take to this readily, and it's just too hard to stumble across it. We're trying to make it easier to stumble across it. But yeah, I'm just as to the commentaries, this kind of ties into that about channels doing advanced work. Look through the channels tab on YouTube that I have there. We have links to. Here, I'll just read them out. There's no harm in giving a shout out here. So who are we linking to right now? Under the channels tab, YouTube at Socialism for All. Adrestia's Revolt is a woman doing audiobooks, and there's a lot up there, and 4,000 plus subscribers. Andrew S. Reitenberg, fewer subscribers. He's done all 3 volumes of Capital, so there's that. Bestie Marx is a long-time large Twitter account who recently started a YouTube channel, is doing good work, and is educated as a communist. Boilerplate Socialism is actually an S4A viewer who started a channel, and commenter who started a channel. Gave them a link because they're trying to, add to the content. And I know that they're coming from a good place, and they're in a party and stuff like that. Comrade Reads, I'm less familiar with actually, but does audiobooks. I think that might be an older, let me check. I think that's an older channel that's not being updated so much, but they have stuff there. Danky Kang is a streamer who was pretty big, is over 3,000, as I was getting started. Took 2 long hiatuses, but is back streaming now, and is a Maoist, I believe. Dark Synovia does both kind of like Star Wars kind of like fandom stuff and socialist stuff, but I think is an anti Caleb Maupin person, and they're I drop in on their streams sometimes because good people as far as I know. So Comrade Reads last updated I think about a year ago. 51 videos. Sorry, I'm just trying to do accurate information here. Yeah, last updated a year ago. So it is what it is. Fellow Traveler has done streaming, has done. I appeared on Fellow Traveler back in the day when I was just getting started. Actually, one of the first videos I did was when I was still running the Facebook page. Somebody sent me a Fellow Traveler video and said, "Hey, can you respond to this?" And so it was like probably in the first like 15 videos I did was a response to Fellow Traveler about Bernie, and I basically largely agreed. And then we've stayed in touch since then, and they do streaming, they do some like topical video essays. I think he's working on one about North Korea now. Looking forward to that. Actually, let me see. I haven't checked in a while, so I don't know if that's been uploaded yet. Finnish Bolshevik has been going since like 2014, 44,000 subscribers. Does a lot, yeah, like as the commenter said, a lot more advanced topics. In Defense of Communism is, I believe, attached to the Greek Communist Party, KKE, and that's run by a guy that compiles a lot of stuff on more underground European communism and elsewhere, and I tend to like that site. Idagen is an Italian comrade doing anti-fascist work. Luna Oi is a Vietnamese member, I believe, of the Communist Party of Vietnam, and doing work there. And it looks like the North Korea thing hasn't been posted yet at Fellow Travelers page, just updating that. But Luna does regular streams, and yeah, is a Vietnamese communist that can tell you something about living in a socialist society and how they do things, and is a really good international perspective, especially for people in the U.S. and Europe to be exposed to and become an ally of. Marxism Today is run by Marxist Paul, who is an Irish Marxist-Leninist Maoist. The Marxist Project. I don't know that much about the people who run the Marxist Project, but they're another larger channel, 46,000 subscribers, and they do like a roughly once a month video essay on various topics. They had a thing on Ukrainian Nazis like way before that thing blew up, like before Russia invaded. And if you're looking for like advanced, not just beginner stuff, but intermediate and more advanced stuff, definitely look at the Marxist Project as well. And let's see what we have. Marxist-Leninist Theory is Finn Ball's audiobook channel. A lot of the older audiobooks are computer read, but they're at least online, Sometimes the only thing you can find, nobody's read it yet, so the only thing you can find is a computer read book, and that's a decent channel. Like, your odds of finding it there are pretty good. The People CDC, we do a lot of COVID stuff here. People CDC is still a small channel, but they are trying to hold the line on COVID. Politsturm International, I mentioned before, is tied to... they have a larger Russian language channel, which has about 50,000 subscribers. But this is the English language channel, Politsturm International. And they do, like 10 to 20 minute videos and some shorts on a variety of historical topics and theoretical topics. And I generally like what comes out of them. And Prolekult, Prolekult, Prolekult. They do like sort of cinematic quality almost video essays. Some of them are short. Some of them are 2 hours long. They did a movie on fascism that's 2 hours long. Definitely check them out. Some high quality work. And the Red Army, which is the host of the Thin Blue Lies podcast that I have been collaborating with recently with Sal, who had her own channel and then was part of the Red Army. So that is up there as well. And there are some readings of various audiobooks. I know I'm linking in my things. I think The housing question is in an S4A playlist, and they've done other things I haven't done. What is it? Trotskyism or Leninism, and various other things. You can check out what's up on there as well. All right, anyway, just mentioning some of the other channels that I think are worth a shout out. No doubt there's others, but those are the ones I'm linking to. Are you planning on uploading another chapter of Capital? Yes, it's in the basic Marxism-Leninism study guide playlist. I have some other things I need to get to first, but yes, we will get to that. Yeah, talking about the people who organized the Canadian convoy, Pat King is disgusting. Same with Tamara Litch. All the organizers were gross right-wingers. The convoy came through my city. They were a huge nuisance. It's funny to me how meme has just come to mean joke. Like, I was just memeing. I was just joking. That's not actually, like, just for reference. There's that website, Know Your Meme. But let's even go a step beyond. Let's know what a meme is. A meme was put forward as a concept similar to gene. Like, a gene is sort of the basic unit of genetics, like a biological building block. A meme is tied to the idea of memetics, which is like it's like a unit of a cultural idea, pretty much. So it's kind of come to just mean joke, but that's definitely not what meme originally means. People should look that up. It's a concept sort of worth coming to grips with if you're trying to do sociological analysis. So I love the meme of Native American looking at the ground and saying, "A white man has been here." Geezer replies, "How do you know?" Video essay, and it's thumbnails of BreadTube videos. Yeah, that stuff's gotta go. It's just like adding to the fucking noise out there. Socialists who don't understand the seriousness of COVID are probably my biggest pet peeves at the moment. It's like we all forgot about disabled people or something. Well, it's not even just that. I mean, yes, there are some people at extremely high risk of COVID, but even the average, person who wouldn't consider themselves disabled is also at very high risk of COVID as well. We're all at risk, some people at extreme risk. Yeah, there's a lot of good scientists on the left, but it seems they get ignored a lot, unfortunately. Let me just say it now. U.S. medicine, public health, biology, by and large, are completely sold out. These people are slaves to their paycheck. Positions in public health are extremely hard to come by. People who get them, there's a lot of times politics involved. They don't want to rock the boat. And what does that mean? They're willing to let you and me and our kids die. Everyone who is, the schools are where this is really being spread. They won't shut them down. And they're all silent because they all want to keep their jobs. They all want to keep their paycheck. They want to keep their prestige. They don't want to be known as that, kook who's going to be going against the grain. It's an extraordinarily conformist system. It does not work to do its job at all. And no one in society at any level of vulnerability is being adequately protected right now from SARS coronavirus 2. It's spreading and spreading and mutating and mutating. There was actually a study that just came out showing that now that COVID has mutated to the XBB, even the most recent update of the vaccine, it keeps dropping in efficacy because the virus keeps mutating around it. So the vaccine is useful for preventing the most severe disease, but we need additional transmission controls. We need to filter the air and ventilate spaces properly. We need mask mandates and real masks, not just wearing a napkin on your face, but an N95 or better. Those need to be manufactured and distributed to people for free. Their use needs to be mandated. We need weekly testing in every institutional setting with PCR tests, not rapid tests, which are very inaccurate and don't get logged anywhere. We need to count tests, even including reinfections, even including vaccinated people. They stopped counting these things, which makes the test count look like it's gone down. We need all of these things, quarantining, testing, isolation, paying people to stay home, and so on. We need that for actual transmission control. Otherwise, the virus is just going to mutate and mutate and mutate, and it's going to adapt to all of our immune responses, and it's going to defeat them. It's a matter of time, and the XBB strains that came in late fall, November, December, now are the dominant strains, are going to kick our asses whether we're vaccinated or not. And that's a nightmare scenario because it means that, plan A is don't get infected. That's your transmission control. That's avoiding crowds. That's N95 or better, P100 masks. That's plan A, is don't get the virus in your body. Plan B is the vaccine. If you do take all those precautions and happen to get infected, it at least will protect against, it'll lower your odds of the most severe outcomes. Hospitalization, death, long COVID, etc. But it can't reduce your odds to zero of those things. And, so what we're seeing is people, even young people, 30s, 40s, 50s, getting COVID, being super sick, then getting a heart attack 6 weeks later. That's not okay. It's not normal. It's caused by COVID. Because it damages most of your major organs. Any organ that has ACE2 receptors, that's how COVID enters your cell. It attacks and kills T cells, liver cells, heart, gut, kidney, brain. Causes extensive damage throughout the entire body. Massive inflammation, autoimmunity. It can turn into a lingering low-grade infection. It disrupts your gut microbiome. All kinds of things that keep your body regulated. It just wreaks havoc on your system. So plan A is don't get sick. Plan B is, you have a vaccine that if you do get sick, at least will reduce your odds of having the worst effects of it. But we're not doing plan A on a societal level, just some individuals are, and that's not working very well. Because if you're in a room of 100 people who are masking, those masks are filtering it so that each mask doesn't have to work as hard. If you have one mask in a room of 99 people who aren't wearing masks, that one mask is trying to bear the load and do all the filtering. So we need social level transmission control, not individual level. That's not a personal choice. We're all in this together and we need to fucking act like it. But that means disrupting business as usual. And the CDC and everything else is completely captured by big money. And they're making, they will acknowledge this. They will acknowledge what I'm telling you. And then they refuse to actually make the mandates that would make it happen, the things that need to happen. And they say personal choice instead. Well, no. And the information isn't circulated wide enough for people to even make an informed consent-based choice. They'll publish it in the fine print that long COVID is a severe risk that can attack and kill T cells like HIV does. Not to the same extent, but to a significant extent. And then they're telling, oh, well, it's, personal choice. Well, not if you don't actually inform people, and then also, if we are going to do that, it needs to be done on a societal level, not an individual level, because people interact in large groups. So, you need to make rules around that. So we're not doing the transmission control, and then that is making it so that plan B, the vaccine, which is infection mitigation, that's going to be over time less and less effective because the virus is going to get better and better and better because it's spreading and spreading and mutating to become more fit for this environment. That's why you can't just let it spread. So, and again, they'll all acknowledge this, but then they don't make the mandates that we actually need to get the outcomes that they say that they want to do. Anyway, yeah, a little bit of a COVID aside there. We have a long playlist, although this is, we go into this in detail. We've read many, many dozens of articles on all the medical stuff of COVID. Oh, yeah, also Space Baby. Yeah, they don't have a ton of videos, but yeah, they have a great video on China. I did link that in a community post a while ago. Who is iDan Simpson? I don't even know who that is. Oh, he's a Russia supporter? He literally told me, quote, "Where is your material analysis?" when I pushed back on his support of Russia. Yeah, that whole thing, I'll tell you. I haven't gotten into the whole Russian war thing in a while, but like it's been 14 months, folks. Like, where is that headed? It doesn't look good. Yeah, Dan, I really don't know who that is. I remembered a close family member works next to this dude that literally has had COVID. I kid you not, 6 times, and he never wants to wear a mask, etc., and no one else wears a mask but said family member. That guy is probably shaving like 5 years off of his life every time he does that. Like, when you get COVID, it causes massive damage in your body. So, yeah. I mean, we already see it. Let me support this statement with some reinfection data, if my computer will respond here. Where is it? Here we go. Here's one. This is from acute and post-acute sequelae associated with SARS coronavirus 2 infection. So SARS coronavirus 2 is the virus that causes COVID. Acute means the first few weeks when you get sick, and then post-acute is disease that happens after those first few weeks. After you're not like seemingly actively sick anymore in that initial few weeks of your body trying to fight the infection. But anyway, post-acute. Sequelae means it's like sequel consequences or things that follow. All right. That's by Bo, Shia, and Al-Ali in Nature Medicine from 10 November 2022. So number of infections per individual, you can see with each reinfection, your odds of specific conditions compared to uninfected individuals goes up. So your odds of musculoskeletal problems goes up. Your odds of neurological problems goes up with each reinfection. Your odds of mental health problems, anxiety and depression in particular, goes up. Although there's also cognitive issues that are caused by COVID, commonly known as brain fog, should be really known as brain damage, memory problems, executive functioning problems, which is sort of like goal planning, risk reward, like impulse control in a way. Anyway, diabetes, your risk of that goes up. It's quite a lot, actually. So this is compared to uninfected individuals. You're compared to an uninfected individual, they have a risk factor of 1. And then if you get reinfected 3 or more times, your odds of diabetes like go up dramatically. Just look at the chart. And then blood clots and pulmonary problems, cardiovascular problems, kidney problems, and hospitalization. Your risk of hospitalization is 8-fold versus somebody who's uninfected. And again, diabetes, your risk is 3-fold compared to somebody who is not infected. I mean, do you want to just be risking diabetes like that? Or kidney problems, more than 5-fold if you get infected 3 times or more versus an uninfected individual. And now, let alone carry that out to like 6 or more reinfections. Let's show another chart. This is from another study we've covered on the channel. Sorry, I thought this was a different graphic. But here's an article. One COVID expert's reinfection shows why hybrid immunity may no longer be possible. So they're putting out this idea for a while that like, oh, get the vaccine, and then if you get infected, it's going to cause better hybrid immunity. That's not actually the case. And that's been, we're going to do some articles on that specifically. And we did one recently, actually, in the last COVID update. I think it was Livestream 94, that we showed that kids do not show an adaptive immune response to COVID. So it's like you get it, then you just get it again, and your immune system acts like it's novel every time. All right, anyway. Yeah, don't just keep getting COVID. You do not want to get COVID. Ooh, traveling abroad soon for work. Yeah, I'd be stressed too. Get a P100 for your flight. Definitely get a P100 for your flight. I'd wear goggles too, to be honest. Like, that's the level I'd go to on a plane at this point. What makes COVID different from other diseases we collectively struggle with? We don't have anything that is this. It's so the most contagious virus we know of, up there with measles. For one thing, it's highly contagious and airborne. That means, like HIV by comparison is relatively difficult to spread. You need contact with bodily fluids that aren't always, present in casual daily contact. But with SARS coronavirus 2, it's every time you breathe out, you are exhaling infectious particles. So that's one thing, is it comes out in your breath, very much unlike other serious diseases. Um, and then for the impact it has on your body, so here, I'll just put the thing up on the screen. There's a number of things. It does brain damage. So here is from an article we covered a while back. Um, This is from National Geographic in the UK. Even mild COVID-19 can cause your brain to shrink. Recent brain imaging shows that the disease can cause physical changes equivalent to a decade of aging and trigger problems with attention and memory. Now, at that time, a year ago, exactly why was still a mystery. However, we know there have been subsequent studies that show that the virus causes inflammation in the brain. And inflammation, while a certain amount of it can be an important part of healing processes in the response to some trauma or something entering your body that shouldn't be there, having it on a chronic, sustained basis just causes rapid premature aging and damage. So, you can get things like cytokine storms that just sort of, again, like wreak havoc on the body. So there's that. There's also, what do we have here? Let me show the first thing first. Yeah, so this is a study, January 2022. Immunological dysfunction persists for 8 months following the initial mild to moderate SARS coronavirus 2 infection. It's from Nature Immunology. So, following up on that, and this is not from the same thing, but it was from some media coverage about this topic. This is from another article. Quote, individuals who are infected with COVID have many fewer T cells. That's a problem for us because T cells are a really important part of our immune system that helps us to defend against infection. Yeah, so T cells and B cells are like major frontline part of your immune system. And T cells also help to go after cancer cells before the cancer can take root. If you have fewer T cells, will we start seeing a lot more cancer 10 years from now? Possibly. But at least 3 studies show that COVID-19 actually kills off a significant number of the body's T cells. So even when someone recovers from the acute stage of COVID, they're at a heightened risk for other viral, bacterial, and fungal infections. And so we know this about measles, for example. It kind of wipes out your immune memory. Viruses can do funky things to your immune system. This is one of them. Quote, that is causing a lot of people to go to the emergency rooms, rightly so, to seek medical aid for these other infections they're getting because they're walking around with a suppressed immune system. And it's overwhelming our healthcare system. The only other virus that attacks and kills T cells is HIV, which causes AIDS, said Katzenbach. Now, there are some viruses that can turn T cells cancerous, but they don't just straight out kill them. So anyway, to be clear, nobody's equating COVID's impact on T cells to what HIV did to, well, what HIV can do to immune systems. But COVID-19 does eliminate a significant number of T cells, enough to make large numbers of people sick and overwhelm emergency wards with RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, pneumonia, strep infections, and other ailments. Quote, with the loss of these T cells, we are now more vulnerable to all of these other infections, other viruses, other bacteria. So, yeah, we're seeing, like, there was a massive wave of RSV hospitalizations. That's not normally the case. Why is it happening? COVID-induced immune suppression is probably a major reason for that. And the other thing of like how COVID may cause long COVID is because of the immune suppression, latent viruses from past infections, which are in your body but dormant, may be reactivated. So there's all kinds of things about the seriousness of this. I walk past 20 nurses in a day and not one uses a mask, but me and the doctors who do, me and the doctors do, what does that tell you? It tells me we're fucked. Yeah, the nurses are just going around spreading it then, in that case. Agit_prop is one of the biggest ML channels on YouTube if you understand Russian. Yeah, I mean, and you can get reasonably decent subtitles too. If you just click the subtitles, it'll auto-translate. If only people in my union wanted to, quote, talk about COVID, because they legit told me that they don't want to. Drives me crazy, yeah. ThePhysicsGirl, a big YouTuber, got ME/CFS from long COVID. She can't function normally 4 months. I had long COVID through most of 2021. I was completely out of it, out of breath, massive brain fog. I would start having a thought. It was like, so this is this okay. So I used to play The Legend of Zelda when I was a kid on Nintendo, and if people are familiar with that game, there's a little enemy. It's a hand that comes out of the wall in certain rooms. It's called a Wallmaster. I looked this up recently because this was the best. This was the metaphor that came to mind. This was the mental image I got. It would be super annoying when you're playing that game, which I love, by the way. Brief shout out to the original Legend of Zelda. But you'd be like near the end of the dungeon, and you'd just like pause for a minute to just like catch your breath, and then a hand would just come out of the wall and yank you back to the beginning of the dungeon, and you'd have to do the whole thing over again. Well, you'd know where to go, but you'd have to do it all over again. That was what was happening to my thoughts. I would get a thought starting, and I'd be like, that's a decent thought. And it was like a Wallmaster just came out, like his hand came out of nowhere and just yanked my thought away. And I was like, oh, I know I was just thinking something, but I literally have no memory of what I was just thinking. That's what would happen for like 10 months. It eventually went away, but I lost almost a full year of my life like that. So, yeah. iDan Simpson is one of those Twitch streamers who seems to be streaming all the time and not doing much else. Someone in his chat was asking about a good starting point for theory, so I suggested Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific by Engels. Yeah, that's a very basic text and a good suggestion. Dan hadn't even heard of it. Why call yourself a communist if you know... Yeah, if you haven't read Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, that's a very, very basic thing that's going to be on any party or recommended reading list, syllabus guide. Absolutely. That person needs to stop streaming and at least take the time to read that. All right, enough about that. I hadn't even really heard of him, so whatever. COVID is honestly the worst illness I've ever come down with. My energy levels have not been the same since. Nevertheless, the fight continues. You can compare COVID to HIV without directly equating them. I mean, it's relevant, and I will fully stand for comparing them because they're not the same in extent, but they are similar in effect. That's entirely valid. I like playing a game whenever I engage with bourgeois media to see when they talk about spreading diseases if they mention that it could be correlated with long COVID induced reduced immune responses. Yeah, they don't. Actually, so Australian news, I feel like it was Channel 7 if I'm remembering correctly, was recently just had a thing like the hospitals are full of people who have infections. COVID could be to blame. But then if you read the article, they're trying to blame it on immunity debt. Like the idea that in 2020, people like avoided each other for 2 months and somehow this like screwed up our immune system for life. That's total bullshit. No, it's fucking long COVID more likely. So they wind up taking a serious issue and then turning it into like an anti-social distancing, anti-masking argument. I gotta say, this kind of medical talk makes me quite queasy. Pretty much the only time I stomach through it is during when S4A talks about it. We're getting opinions on The Legend of Zelda now. No, the first one's the best, period. No discussion. You're banned. No, I just I was never really into any of the following ones. The first one just there's a certain magic to that game. The music, I don't know. It's just really, really good. One of those just very, very good games. But yeah, my thoughts got Wallmastered for sure. Boy, there's a lot of there's a lot of comments getting deleted, and I feel like for good reason. But like, man, this is why I have raids turned off. We got 60 people in here, and like a healthy amount of trolls. So shout out to the mods, Health Revolt, Shakespeare, and Sal for keeping things, keeping things good. No, I understand that people have conflated COVID and HIV, and that shouldn't be the case. But people should understand those are the only two viruses that like murder T cells. And again, COVID, as far as we know, does not do it to the same extent. But uh, it does it to some extent, to enough to have an impact. And especially if people keep getting, like, it's basically government policy now that everyone's just going to get reinfected 3 or 4 times a year, and it's good for you. Then we're going to have people with permanently suppressed and possibly permanently damaged immune systems, because we don't know what happens if you get infected 5 times, and will your immune system even be able to do anything after that point? So we don't know. One infection, yeah, it's definitely not the effects of HIV. 10 infections, I don't know. I don't know. We don't know that yet because it's a novel virus. But people should be using the precautionary principle and taking this seriously. So I'll tell you what, we're caught up with the chat today, and this was a good chat. I actually think I would prefer to end it here today than to get into. I definitely want to read the story about union organizing. It's 7 pages, and I feel like I'm going to be here for another hour between that and the chat if I start that. I actually have another article here. I'll tease it now. That is about. Here we go. Unpacking the U.S. aristocracy. So it's kind of like the a bit of the ruling class, handing down wealth from generation to generation that we were doing in Europe before, but a look at the U.S. And this one is about 7 or 8 screens long. And then I want to do the labor union thing. And I don't think that getting into that in this stream would be the wisest idea. So I'm just trying to make sure that the streams go off as well as they can. So why don't we, if anybody has any concluding thoughts, throw them into the chat. I can definitely respond for a few more minutes, but I'm not going to start any major features. We will do that in the next stream, probably tomorrow. And we'll take a look at that then, but soon anyway. Oh, so somebody was trying to trigger the chat by calling Lenin a conspiracy theorist. He triggered me. He won. Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of crazy. It's not a conspiracy theory, quote unquote, to do extensive analysis on how the rich are, staying in power and systematically exploiting the working class. That's not some kind of crackpot thing about, I mean, it technically is a relatively small group of individuals, in this case a social class with a particular shared set of relationships to the means of production. You could view it as a sort of conspiracy in that sense. But as Marxists, we go on dialectical materialism, historical materialism, the change in property relations over time being the dominant factor, not just small conspiratorial cabals. I mean, that exists within capitalism as the capitalists, vie for power amongst themselves. Those things happen. There are conspiracies, there are cover-ups, but Marxism does not concern ourselves with them as the motive force of history. Those are things that happen within history, and it's fine to look at them. But fascists tend to take more of the conspiracy as driving force of history kind of view. We've talked about that before. If you want to look at that, we have an audiobook on the channel, How to Overthrow the Illuminati. It's a pretty good intro to that subject. Somebody's vying for the next mod spot. They're anyway, yeah, well, you're definitely noted as as a in the hopper for mod volunteers. Yeah, CDC back in the 13th century, catching the bubonic plague 3 to 4 times a year is good for the economy. What, do you want the plague to win or something? Yeah, it's just sick, no pun intended, or pun intended, I don't know. We're not going to last for very long at this rate with the let it rip policy. which is intended. It's not medically informed. Everything we know about COVID medically indicates it's a very serious, highly communicable airborne disease, which is BSL-3. I mean, it's considered on the same safety level. It's as much of a hazard as tuberculosis. And let me see if I have the graphic on that, actually. BSL-3 diseases. Just so this is where COVID is categorized. So biosafety levels. You see biosafety level 1 through 4. All right. And they have different protocols for, okay, so BSL 1, no containment is required, defined organisms unlikely to cause disease. So a sample of a BSL 1 is E. coli. E. coli is found in the human digestive system, but if it gets into the wrong place in your body, it can cause sickness. And so these types of pathogens are biological agents that present minimal potential hazard to personnel in the environment. If you're working in a lab where there is E. coli, wash your hands, don't rub your eyes, you're probably going to be fine, And so do they need to be autoclaved? So autoclaving is a kind of, it's like a pressure cooker kind of. So it's a sterilizing machine, basically, where basically in microbiology, if you're working with some microorganism that is really pathogenic, can really cause disease, you would need to autoclave the material to sterilize it afterwards because the risk of it sort of spreading is really high. But with something like E. coli, wash your hands, you're going to be fine. Then there's BSL-2, so biosafety level 2. And this is the system that is used in labs that study microorganisms and disease research. This is the codes that they follow for the level of risk here. So BSL-2 things, those do need to be contained. There's moderate risk, and they can cause disease of varying severity. So examples are influenza, HIV, and Lyme disease. Now you might think HIV being the same category as influenza. Why? Well, because it's somewhat hard to get infected with it. Don't get me wrong, HIV has been a scourge, and it does transmit through sexual contact, for example, and other similar methods involving like blood. But again, that's not sort of casual daily contact. A toilet seat. No, that's it. Not things like that. So I would assume that's why HIV is in the BSL-2, even though the disease that it can cause, like it says in the description, whoops, hit the microphone. The description is disease of varying severity. Obviously, influenza and HIV do not cause the same severity of disease, and both do require containment if you're working with that pathogen in a lab. But the extent of the disease is really, really different. The severity of the disease is very different. And then Lyme disease. So these are agents associated with human disease, posing moderate hazards to personnel and the environment. So you have to be careful with them. They do cause disease, but the hazards are moderate in that either the level of disease is lower, like influenza is fairly transmissible, but the level of disease is low. So you do have to be careful. And then HIV, the level of their severity of disease is high, but it's harder to get infected with it. So anyway, it poses moderate hazards of various types to personnel in the environment, and there are no autoclave requirements. Then BSL-3, this is where COVID is. High containment, aerosol transmission, and serious and potentially lethal disease. Example is tuberculosis. Pathogen type, indigenous or exotic agents that present a potential for aerosol transmission, and agents causing serious or potentially lethal disease. And then pass through autoclave with bioseal required in the lab room. So that's where COVID is. And then the only thing above that is BSL-4, max containment for exotic high-risk agents causing life-threatening disease exclusively. Ebola virus is an example. Dangerous and exotic agents that pose a high risk of aerosol transmitted laboratory infections, and life-threatening disease. So even working with it in a lab is very unsafe. There's still a big risk even working with it in a lab, and there are autoclave requirements there. So that's where we're at. We're letting a BSL-3 disease just spread uncontrolled through the population. You want a mask? Personal choice. That's what we're doing. And you know where they're spreading the most? Schools. Young children are being allowed to spread and carry home a BSL-3 disease. Is this a society you want to live in? It's not one I want to live in. We need to change this. All right, just wanted to bring that up. All right, people are talking about a potential mod elimination round deathmatch here. I appreciate your enthusiasm for wanting to help out. I think for the time being, 3 mods is enough, though. So we'll say that. All right, that is it for today's stream. I will post when I'm going to stream next. I might not be able to do it tomorrow, but we will do it soon, and we will pick up with the topics that we were talking about. Worked in a fair amount of COVID stuff today. Appreciate everybody showing up in the chat and helping to keep the chat on point, because you all help to make these streams what they are. Could I do the streams without you? Yes, but they would be less than they are, so I really appreciate it. So yeah, I come in, I learn things, and I appreciate that high-level, intelligent, focused interaction, and as well as, the occasional intelligent, focused, well-meaning beginner questions. That is welcome. We're not trying to be exclusive. But I do want people to understand, where we're coming from here. Hence the lengthy introduction today. All right, appreciate everybody, and we will see you in the next stream.